Hey guys, tonight we drift into the soft morning haze of ancient India, where, on the banks of the mighty Ganges, an emperor is still asleep. His palace rises out of the mist like something halfway between a fortress and a poem. The city around him, Patliputra, is just beginning to stir, and you, lucky dreamer, are already awake. You pad through corridors tiled in polished stone, past latticework screens, and sleepy guards who definitely were not sleeping on duty. There's a smell in the air, jasmine maybe, or someone making ghee-drenched flatbread somewhere nearby. It's humid, of course. You're basically wrapped in a hot, invisible blanket that no one asked for. Because tonight, we mean this very long night stretched by imagination and gentle sarcasm. You're going to follow the weirdly sleepy, occasionally terrifying, and surprisingly reflective journey of Emperor Ashoka. Yes, the guy who went from ruthless conqueror to spiritual motivational speaker. You're walking in his sandals now. Or maybe they're velvet slippers. Either way, you probably won't survive this as an unpaid intern in ancient India. But hey, at least you're well-fed and historically significant. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time down below. It's always fun to see who's trying to fall asleep with history from halfway around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step out onto a balcony. The sun isn't fully up yet, and the city of Patliputra stretches before you in long strips of dusty ochre, half-shaded rooftops, and faint chimney smoke. It's easy to forget just how old this place is. How many generations have left footprints on these roads before they were roads? You squint toward the river, where long wooden boats glide across the Ganges like lazy dragonflies. Below, sleepy oxen snort beside carts filled with grain. Birds wheel and complain in the canopy above. Somewhere nearby, a water buffalo sneezes with great conviction, and still, Emperor Ashoka sleeps. Born sometime around 304 BCE, Ashoka is currently not yet the Great. He's just a prince, one of several sons of sprawling Mauryan dynasty that loves order, power, and detailed ledgers. His father, Emperor Bindusara, has a name that sounds like a Marvel villain, but is more of a tax and iron fist kind of guy. The Mauryan Empire itself, it's big, it's organized, and it's allergic to rebellion. Ashoka isn't the eldest. He's not the favorite. He's just the smart one with anger issues. Classic younger son energy. As a child, he's known for being unusually sharp, with a habit of asking difficult questions. He's also reportedly very good at swordplay, not great with tact, and once tried to discipline a palace chef by sending him to the elephant stables. For a week. Fringe tales insist Ashoka had a slightly crooked gait and a bad temper, hence the nickname Chan Ashoka, or Ashoka the Fierce. According to palace rumor, one unlucky servant once found himself banished simply for using the emperor's favorite ink jar for beetle stamping. You know, totally normal ancient punishment vibes. But you, right now, are a whisper in the walls. A polite ghost with a front row seat to history. You drift down past hanging gardens where parrots bicker over figs. The scent of rosewater and sandalwood rises from a courtyard below. There's a pond filled with lotus flowers so perfect they seem printed onto reality. Here's the thing about ancient Patliputra. It's not just a royal city. It's a machine. A humming, bureaucratic, highly planned urban empire where everything from mail delivery to manure disposal runs on a system. Greek historians like Megasthenes visited and were frankly blown away. It's like Athens, they said, but with more elephants and better math. Paraphrased, obviously. And here's your first mainstream historical fact. Patliputra was one of the largest cities of the ancient world, with an administrative structure so advanced that modern scholars still marvel at its urban planning. Now back to Ashoka. He stirs. A servant tiptoes in to place fresh garlands and open the lattice shutters. Ashoka groans softly. Definitely not a morning person, and sits up with the air of someone forced into consciousness by duty rather than desire. You relate. He's about 15, maybe 16 here. Already tall, already scowling, and already scheming ways to avoid his math tutor. The royal palace, despite its grandeur, is a place of constant testing. You're always proving yourself. Can you lead? Can you argue with logic? Can you recite all the lineages from the Vedas without falling asleep? Spoiler, you can't. Historians still argue whether Ashoka was truly overlooked by his father or simply biding his time. Some suggest his early exile to a provincial governorship, far from the capital, was a punishment. Others think it was strategic training. But for now, he's still a boy. One who lounges on silk cushions, complains about breakfast fruit, and wonders, aloud, if maybe the royal astrologer is just making things up. You follow him through the morning. A quick prayer to household gods, a cold water splash that nearly gives him hypothermia, and a wardrobe change involving 3 attendants, 2 golden belts, and 1 truly unfortunate hat. And then lessons. There's a scroll on foreign kingdoms. Ashoka rolls his eyes. There's a lecture on geometry. Ashoka immediately tries to apply it to sword angles. And there's one moment, barely noticeable, where he stares too long at a painting of a battlefield and doesn't blink. Quirky tidbit incoming. Marayan palace walls often feature murals not of royal victories, but cautionary tales, like elephants trampling courtiers or cities drowned by angry gods. Educational, in a terrifying bedtime story kind of way. Later, Ashoka slips away from the lessons and wanders into stables. There, away from tutors and expectations, he brushes down his favorite horse, an aging gray with limp, and feeds it palm sugar. He mutters something about never wanting to wear that hat again. You nod in ghostly agreement. It's only the first glimpse. But already, the shape of an emperor begins to form. Curious, proud, sharp, restless. Someone not quite meant to rule, but far too dangerous to ignore. And above him, the sun finally climbs the sky, casting long, bright shadows across the kingdom he will one day command. You follow him into a sunlit courtyard, stepping lightly through a mosaic of warm stone and trailing vines. Ashoka's sandals slap softly with each stride, annoyed, deliberate, a touch performative, like a teenager forced to do chores when it very important brooding to finish. This is still the early Ashoka, before the monuments, before the edicts carved into stone, before the sudden moral makeover that historians will write essays about for centuries. Right now, he's just a semi-exiled princeling, freshly assigned to govern a dusty region far from the capital. The region in question? Ujjain, a city-state with just enough drama to make things interesting. Think of it as a posting for the gifted but unmanageable. It's out of sight, but not out of importance. Ujjain is a trade hub, a place where merchants hawk spices, silk, and star maps, where languages blend and arguments over saffron pricing are a serious Tuesday morning problem. Ashoka is being stationed there by his father, Emperor Bindusara. In the same way your high school might have moved you to a different class for behavioral redirection. Historians still argue whether this move was punishment for palace misbehavior or a calculated trial run at real power. Some accounts suggest Ashoka earned the posting after suppressing a local rebellion with slightly too much enthusiasm. Others claim it was a subtle way to distance him from the line of succession. You, in your invisible role as his eternal shadow, glide beside his chariot as it rattles out the city gates. Behind him, Patliputra hums on. Before him, dusty roads snake through forests, fields, and towns lined with banyan trees and skeptical locals. The journey is slow. Ancient Indian roads were more like well-trodden suggestions than proper infrastructure. Ashoka rides beside a caravan of ox-drawn wagons, soldiers, scholars, and a few suspiciously nervous cooks. You spot a man whose only job is to carry the royal water pot. He's deeply committed. Somewhere along the way, you stop beside a riverbank. The air smells of wet soil and cardamom. A traveling bard serenades a camp with a poem about wise elephants and ungrateful princes. Ashoka listens, expression unreadable, and then tosses a coin in the man's bowl without comment. Quirky detail time. Royal caravans of the Marayan elite included portable astrologers. That's right. Ashoka has a guy whose job is to stare at the sky and nervously suggest which days are auspicious for doing anything from governing to taking a bath. You arrive in Ujjain to the sound of temple bells and over-enthusiastic flower garlands. It's a city that knows how to welcome a new ruler, especially one with a track record for unpredictable swordplay. Ashoka sets up court in a sprawling estate on the edge of the city. The first thing he does is inspect the local tax rolls. The second thing, visit the prison. You watch his jaw clench when he sees the cramped cells and hears tales of bribery. It's not a kindness exactly, but it is curiosity. Over the weeks, Ashoka throws himself into administration with the same energy he once used to glare at geometry. He meets merchants at dawn. He listens to farmers until dusk. He hosts feasts for Brahmins and quietly questions wandering philosophers about the meaning of pain. And then he meets her, Devi, a merchant's daughter. If the rumors are true, sharp-eyed, witty, completely unimpressed by his title. She offers him sweet lime water and promptly tells him that his royal crest looks like a turtle in a bad mood. You, of course, float nearby as Ashoka's ears turn red. They talk for hours. She speaks of dharma, of compassion, of local irrigation problems. He listens, genuinely. For once, he isn't being watched or judged or reminded that he's not the heir. Historians still argue whether Devi was officially married to Ashoka or remained his consort. Either way, she changes him. Not all at once, not completely, but something in him softens. He starts attending temple more often. He stops yelling at cooks. He even tells a joke once, badly but still. Their life in Ujjain, though brief, becomes a calm eye in his future storm. Together they have 2 children, Mahendra and Sangamitra. You see Ashoka holding his newborn son for the first time, looking more afraid than he ever did on the battlefield. In these quiet domestic moments, something odd begins to bloom in him, a sort of ache for something more lasting than conquest. But of course, fate has other plans. Word reaches Ujjain that the emperor, Bindusara, is gravely ill. Ashoka is summoned back to the capital, urgently, but not officially. His elder brothers are already jostling for position. What follows is murky. The historical records get weirdly quiet. Some claim Ashoka marched back with private army. Others whisper of palace purges and whispered threats in moonlit corridors. You return with him to Patliputra. The air is thick with incense and paranoia. The emperor dies. The succession crisis explodes. And somehow, Ashoka emerges as victor. Mainstream fact. Ashoka ascends to the throne around 268 BC after a reportedly bloody conflict with his brothers. Estimates vary, but some sources suggest he had as many as 99 siblings. Family dinners must have been a nightmare. The coronation is swift. Gold, elephants, music, and a polite but very tense nod to the gods. But even as he dons the imperial diadem, you notice it. The haunted look. He has power now. Absolute, total, breathtaking power. But the price? That's still unfolding. And beneath it all, a voice begins to whisper in his mind. Not from Devi, not from courtiers, but from somewhere deeper. A question that will follow him into the bloodiest chapter of his rule. What is the worth of a kingdom soaked in sorrow? The crown presses heavy on your head, even though it technically rests on Ashoka's. You trail behind him as he moves through the marble halls of Patliputra, like a man both victorious and vaguely ill at ease. You've seen him in his glory and in his gloom, but now he walks as if the floor beneath him might vanish with a sigh. His brothers, what's left of them, are either dead, exiled, or mysteriously unavailable for comment. One cousin is allegedly living out his days as a monk in the hills, though living is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Historians still argue whether Ashoka truly orchestrated a massacre of his rivals, or if those tales were exaggerated by Buddhist chroniclers who wanted to amplify his later redemption. Either way, let's just say the family WhatsApp group would be unusually quiet. You follow Ashoka as he sits for his first audience as emperor. The room is tense. Officials who once backed other princes now bow low, their foreheads barely grazing the cold floor. Gold pillars gleam. Incense curls lazily through the air. Somewhere in the distance, a peacock shrieks like it knows too much. He speaks softly. Orders land like feathers, but the kind of feathers you realize are from a hawk, not a dove. Ashoka launches into governance like a man making up for lost time. He reviews tax ledgers with terrifying precision, reforms temple oversight, doubles the spies, triples the road maintenance. You know, just in case someone tries to come for him by donkey. He doesn't just rule, he micromanages with the fervor of a man trying not to think about the blood he spilled to get here. But then comes the itch, the imperial urge, the old Mauryan habit of conquest. You drift with him into war councils, their long scrolls and sand-drawn maps. His advisors nod gravely. Borders could be bigger, rivals weaker. And one name keeps coming up, Kalinga. Kalinga is the thorn, a coastal kingdom with a proud military, an even prouder sense of independence. It had somehow remained unconquered even under Ashoka's grandfather, the legendary Chandragupta of Maurya, the man who wrested the empire from the chaos after Alexander the Great's retreat. And now it's just sitting there, independent, insolent, annoyingly well-positioned on the trade routes. Mainstream historical fact. The Kalinga War, fought around 261 BCE, was one of the bloodiest in Indian history, with estimates over 100,000 dead and even more displaced. It was also the last major war Ashoka would ever fight. But we're not there yet. First, we plan. You ride with Ashoka as he reviews his army. Elephants draped in armor, chariots that creak under the weight of gilded archers, infantry stretching beyond the horizon. It's majestic in the way a tsunami is majestic, impressive, and also, well, terrifying. Ashoka visits blacksmiths, reviews logistics, approves the building of supply stations. He's not interested in glory. He's interested in efficiency. Remember the portable astrologer from earlier? He's back, looking increasingly worried. His star chart suggests a time of uncertainty. Ashoka thanks him and orders the army to march anyway. And you, still the quiet observer, notice a small thing. He doesn't bring Devi. She stays behind in Patliputra with the children, whether that's to keep her safe or because he knows she wouldn't approve is up for debate. You know which way you're leaning. The campaign begins. The roads toward Kalinga twist through forests, rivers, and towns that empty as the Mauryan war engine rolls through. You ride at the edges of skirmishes. Arrows whistle by like angry bees. Elephants crash into enemy lines like living tanks. The sound of war is not one sound. It's hundreds layered atop each other. Metal, bone, panic, and the occasional yell of someone who just realized they brought the wrong sandals to battlefield. The people of Kalinga resist fiercely. They're not a minor kingdom. They're skilled, stubborn, and motivated. Their warriors fight like people defending not just a patch of earth, but their entire sense of self. Quirky historical tidbit. Kalinga's navy was reputedly decent enough to worry Mauryan traders. There are vague references to pearl divers who moonlighted as spies. Honestly, they sound like they deserve their own Netflix series. But Ashoka's forces are overwhelming. The war ends not with climactic charge, but with exhaustion. When the dust settles, Kalinga is devastated. Fires smolder in villages. The rivers run muddy. Entire families vanish into statistics of war. Ashoka rides to the ruins. You walk beside him in silence. His eyes scan the faces of survivors, some angry, some vacant. Children clutch their mothers. A monk kneels beside a corpse, praying through clenched teeth. And something happens. Ashoka doesn't smile, doesn't gloat, doesn't call it victory. He gets off his horse, walks into the rubble of a burn home, and just stands there. This isn't what he wanted. Or maybe it was, and that's the horror of it. Historians still argue whether this moment of grief was theatrical or genuine, whether it was a calculated move to pivot public opinion or the true beginning of his transformation. But you, who've watched him from palace courtyards to battlefield carnage, see something shift, something tectonic. He returns to Patliputra, not in triumph, but in near silence. He refuses parades, skips banquets, avoids mirrors. And one evening, as the rain taps against the window of his private chamber, he does something no emperor has done before. He asks for a Buddhist monk, not a royal priest, not a Vedic advisor, a monk. And just like that, the man who ruled with iron begins to unspool. You watch him sit cross-legged across from a monk, an old man draped in saffron robes whose sandals probably haven't been replaced since Chandragupta's time. The chamber is quiet, No jeweled screens, no blaring flutes. Just a muted breath of incense and the soft creak of Ashoka's knees trying to remember how to fold. You're close enough to hear his question. How do I make peace with what I've done? The monk doesn't answer immediately. He just blinks, very slowly, like a tortoise calculating your karma. Eventually, he says something so simple it rings like a temple bell. Start by telling the truth. You exhale. Ashoka doesn't. Not yet. He begins to listen. Really listen. Not like a king humorously enduring a poem about grain taxes, but like a man clinging to the last rung of the self he can stand. The monk tells him about the Buddha's four noble truths. Suffering, desire, the path, that whole thing. Ashoka listens like he's hearing it for the first time. This is the same man who once oversaw interrogations with salt water and silence. Now, he's asking if compassion can be a government policy. Mainstream historical fact. After the Kalinga War, Ashoka famously converted to Buddhism, or, at the very least, adopted its moral framework and made it central to his governance. His edicts, carved in stone pillars across the subcontinent, reflect this transformation. You walk with him later that week through the royal gardens. The roses are blooming obliviously, which seems kind of rude. Honestly, Ashoka pauses at a lotus pond. You half expect him to do the whole life is like a lotus metaphor, but he just mutters. They float even in the filth. He orders the scribes to begin preparing declarations, not military orders, not tax updates, not even invitations to dinner. No, he's writing apologies. He commands his words to be etched in stone. Literally. Remember those famous Ashokan edicts you read about in school? You're watching first drafts take shape, with awkward phrasing and ink smudges, and one poor scribe asking, "Do we really need to mention compassion this many times?" Yes, we do. Quirky historical tidbit. One of Ashoka's edicts scolds the public for celebrating animal sacrifices and suggests they do picnics instead. It's a rare moment in history where a king officially recommends chilling out with hummus and grapes. You begin to see how this shift trickles into everything. He reduces the royal hunting parties from twice a week to twice a year, and even then it's catch and release. Much to the relief of local deer, who stop organizing underground escape routes. He bans unnecessary animal slaughter in the palace kitchens, which causes a minor revolt among the royal chefs, especially the one whose signature dish involved peacock. And then there's the healthcare thing. Ashoka doesn't just build hospitals for humans. He builds them for animals, too. Yep, hospitals for parrots, cows, elephants. If it has a heartbeat and occasionally sneezes, it gets a clinic. Historians still argue whether these institutions were fully functional or more symbolic. Either way, it's probably the first time in recorded history that a lizard could hypothetically receive outpatient care. Ashoka begins sending diplomatic envoys not just to neighboring kingdoms but far beyond. Sri Lanka, Egypt, the Hellenistic world. You picture their puzzled faces when a monk shows up with pamphlets about mindfulness. You sit in as Ashoka confers with his ministers. He's not just turning inward, he's turning the empire, slowly and sometimes clumsily, into a reflection of this new ethos. But not everyone is thrilled. The older nobles whisper. The generals eye each other during strategy meetings. One of them murmurs that maybe the emperor's gone soft. Ashoka, to his credit, doesn't punish them. He just tells them, a soft hand can guide just as firmly as a sword. You think that sounds cool until you realize no one has any idea what it means. Still, the empire doesn't crumble. In fact, it thrives. Trade routes expand. Crime drops. Public rest houses are built for travelers. Wells are dug. Roads are maintained better than some modern cities. Looking at you, LA. There's something oddly boring about this golden age. No major rebellions. No dramatic assassinations, just a lot of paperwork and composting. And that's exactly what makes it beautiful. One afternoon, you find Ashoka sitting in the library courtyard. A child runs up to him. It's his youngest son, playing monk with a bald coconut as a pretend begging bowl. Ashoka watches him for a long time, then says, mostly to himself, I want to be remembered not for battles won, but for lives bettered. It's not flashy. It won't make a great movie, but maybe that's the point. You sit with him as the sun sets. The air smells like sandalwood and rain-damp stone. The world feels, for once, quiet, not because it's empty, but because someone finally made peace louder than war. You're not quite sure when you started doing this, but now you count how many people bow to Ashoka in a given day. It's somewhere between everyone and literally everyone, including animals probably if they had knees. But lately, something's changed. People don't just bow out of fear anymore. They bow slower. Some smile. A few even make awkward eye contact, as if to say, "Thanks for not taxing the rice into extinction." You're standing in one of the quieter parts of the palace now, what used to be the punishment court. Once, this was a place of swift justice, bloodless in theory, but not always in practice. Now it's a waiting room. There's a monk with a clipboard asking people how angry they're on a scale from calm to volcano. Ashoka renamed it the Hall of Reflection. Of course he did. You trail him as he walks through it, listening to petitions. One man's upset about irrigation rights. Another wants to open a roadside mango stand and needs a permit. Riveting stuff. But Ashoka nods thoughtfully at each, pausing to make a note, or more accurately, to dictate a note, because you just know the emperor hasn't held a pen himself in years. Mainstream historical fact. Ashoka's government became one of the most sophisticated administrative systems of its time, using written edicts and designated officers, called Dharma Mahamatras, to promote ethical governance and public welfare. It wasn't just a vibe shift, it was bureaucratic muscle. The Dharma Mahamatras are fascinating. They're like a mix between traveling notaries, ombudsmen, and therapists. They pop up everywhere, inspecting cities, talking to prisoners, visiting temples, making sure everyone's playing nice. One day, you follow one of them into a rural village. The locals eye him like he's part angel, part government survey. He gently questions a schoolteacher, praises a temple cleaner, and then spends 10 minutes listening to an old woman complain that her neighbor's goat has boundary issues. It's all written down. Carefully, respectfully, even the goat part. Historians still argue whether Ashoka's system of moral oversight was truly effective or merely ceremonial. Did the Dharma Mahamatras actually change behavior, or were they just well-dressed hall monitors? The truth's probably somewhere in the middle. Quirky historical tidbit. One of the edicts discusses the proper treatment of servants, including advising against yelling. Somewhere in ancient India, a tired butler was probably like, "Finally!" Ashoka's obsession with ethics even touches the calendar. He starts instituting Dharma holidays. No, not religious festivals, but literal days off to reflect on being less awful. You're pretty sure this is the only empire in history where navel gazing was state-sponsored. He also builds these pillars of Ashoka, gigantic stone columns, some over 40 feet tall, scattered across the empire. They're carved with edicts, proclamations, and advice so wholesome it would make your grandma cry. One reads, "Respect for elders is good. Generosity to priests is good. Not killing things unnecessarily is good." You think about getting that tattooed on your forearm. Ironically, of course, but those pillars, they aren't just inspirational monoliths. They're the original social media posts, broadcast from the top, viral before the internet existed. Birds poop on them now, sure, but they've outlasted empires. One morning, Ashoka takes a walk through a grove where a new pillar is being carved. The stone is pinkish and veined with quartz, like the earth blushing under a compliment. He runs his fingers across the first few lines, and for a second he's quiet. You realize he's reading his own words for the first time in stone. He whispers, "I hope this survives me." Spoiler, it does. He starts issuing edicts about religious tolerance. In an age when most rulers were tossing other faiths out like yesterday's lentils, Ashoka says, "Let all religions dwell in all places, for all seek the same truth." You blink. Did he just invent interfaith harmony while wearing sandals? Later, at a council meeting, Ashoka proposes something strange. Not a temple, not a road, a tree. "I want to plant a fig tree on the main road, with a bench." The ministers squint. "For worship, your majesty?" "No," he says, "for shade." It's one of those moments where time slows down. You think, Empires rise and fall, but the guy who planted a tree for strangers, he gets remembered. The construction orders that follow are bizarre and beautiful. Rest stops with water jugs every mile, tree-lined highways, herbal gardens, public doctors. Even, get this, a government-funded project to distribute medicine to animals and people alike. Ashoka is building a state that's compassionate on purpose, not accidentally, not as PR, but as design. You sit in a garden one evening while he dictates letters to foreign rulers, to the Greeks, to the Sri Lankans, to the Seleucid king. The letters are almost poetic, offer medicinal herbs, sending envoys, inviting them to adopt principles of kindness and humility. One envoy returns months later, beaming and dusty, with stories of Buddhist shrines being built in cities you can barely pronounce. It's like watching kindness spread across continents with nothing but sandals and syllables. You're almost bored by how effective it all is. Almost, but there's a hum underneath it. A tension. Some in court whisper that the empire's too soft now, that enemies smell blood, or, more accurately, sandalwood oil. You watch Ashoka receive word of a border skirmish. His face stays calm, but his knuckles turn white. He doesn't send an army. He sends a Dharma Mahamatra. The man returns 2 weeks later. No bloodshed, just a new irrigation treaty, and a goat returned to its rightful owner. Probably the same goat from earlier. Ashoka sighs and says, "Every war I don't fight is my real victory." You roll your eyes, but a part of you believes him. The palace smells like jasmine and ink today. A new scribe has arrived from Ujjain, and he's nervously adjusting his robes, clearly unsure whether he should bow, nod, or offer fruit. Ashoka, true to recent form, does none of the above and instead asks him about his family. The man nearly faints from surprise. You lean against a pillar, watching the entire encounter unfold like a very polite fever dream. You've grown used to this version of Ashoka, the calm emperor, the philosopher king, the man who plants banyan trees and quotes moral aphorisms like a walking mindfulness app. But beneath the serenity, you sense another layer, one that doesn't get carved into pillars or sung by royal poets. Regret, not the theatrical kind that comes with dramatic sighs, but the quiet type that lingers like smoke after a fire. You catch glimpses of it in the early mornings. Ashoka walks the gardens barefoot, eyes down, tracing the stones like a man haunted not by ghosts, but by memories still warm with breath. Mainstream historical fact. After the Kalinga War, Ashoka didn't just apologize in public. He made his remorse central to his reign. In several of his edicts, he refers to the pain he caused, especially to mothers and children. It's arguably one of the earliest examples of political accountability in human history. Imagine a world where more leaders put their failures in stone. Wild. You wonder that's why he surrounds himself with monks now. Not out of piety, but as a way to keep his own inner chaos in check. They sit with him under trees, share lentil soup, quote sutras, and occasionally doze off mid-chant. Monks nap hard. It's both impressive and intimidating. One day, while watching a stone carver etch another edict, Ashoka casually turns to you and says, "Did you know I outlawed animal sacrifice at court?" You nod. Of course you knew. You saw the memo. But he keeps going. "Once, I would have killed 500 animals before lunch. Goats, bulls, peacocks, whatever they brought me." "Peacocks, you ask?" He shrugs. "They were a delicacy. Tasted like guilt." And just like that, you've lost your appetite. Quirky historical tidbit. Ashoka didn't just ban animal sacrifices. He also commissioned the building of animal hospitals. Yes, actual hospitals. For animals, with staff and herbal treatments. Somewhere in the empire, there was probably a pigeon getting acupuncture. The Dharma keeps expanding. His bureaucracy grows more eccentric by the day. A new department is formed just to oversee fruit trees on public roads. Another one tracks rainfall to make sure ponds stay topped up. You half expect him to launch a ministry of comfortable sandals. And through all this, the monks multiply. Some settle in urban monasteries. Others travel, spreading the Dharma like cheerful nomads with excellent posture. Ashoka give them everything: land, robes, even tax exemptions. You can't help but notice that some of the nobles are getting antsy. Too many bald men in orange. One of them mutters over wine. You resist the urge to say that's my aesthetic. Historians still argue whether Ashoka's favoritism toward Buddhism undermined other traditions, or whether it was part of a larger strategy to unify his sprawling empire through shared ethics. The inscriptions are clear in tone, but the outcomes? Much murkier. One afternoon, he summons the royal architects and instructs them to design something unlike anything the world has seen. Their eyes go wide. A fortress? A palace? A great statue? No, he says, sipping rice water. A monastery, with enough rooms for 1,000 monks. And quiet ones. You hear me? Walls thick enough to keep out politics. You don't have a heart to tell him that even the thickest walls can't block gossip. Months pass. The weather shifts. You're in Taxila now, an important city at the northwest frontier. Ashoka sends you ahead to inspect the new university complex there. The air is dry. The wind smells like cumin and curiosity, and the campus is alive with debate. Students here argue over everything: medicine, astrology, poetry, and the finer points of moral philosophy. Someone scrawled, "Don't trust your Egyo," on a courtyard wall in bright red pigment. You meet a teacher who once served in Ashoka's army. Now he lectures on nonviolence and spinal health. You ask what changed him, and he just says, "Kalinga, everything changed after Kalinga." You spend the night in a dormitory made of sun-baked brick. A monk offers you warm milk and tells you a story about a frog who became a prince by minding his own business. You sleep better than you have in weeks. When you return to the capital, something is different. Ashoka is quieter than usual, though that's not saying much. He's in his study, surrounded by scrolls, staring at an old sword hanging on the wall. "I used to love this blade," he murmurs. "It was perfectly balanced. Could split a reed without bruising it." You ask why he still keeps it. "So I don't forget who I was," he says. Then, after a pause, "And because I can't seem to give it away, no one wants it." You offer to hide it for him. He laughs, says no, it belongs to my shadow now. That evening, the sun sets in streaks of amber. Ashoka sits beside a lotus pond, watching the flowers close for the night. "I've stopped naming years after victories," he says. "Now I name them after intentions." You ask what this year's is called. He smiles softly. "The year of listening." You nod, because you've never heard anything more exhausting or more beautiful. There's a new edict going up today. Number 11, if you're counting, and you are. It's being carved just outside a sleepy riverside village where the loudest sound most days is someone swatting a mosquito and missing. The workers chip slowly, methodically, their chisels tapping out syllables older than their bones. Ashoka stands nearby, arms folded, watching like a man waiting for his legacy to dry. You catch a glimpse of the inscription before the dust settles. It's about kindness to servants and respect for one's parents. Classic Ashoka content. Wholesome, just a bit preachy, and honestly, better than half the posters in your dentist's office. But here's the twist. He started writing these edicts not just in Sanskrit or Prakrit, but also in Greek and Aramaic. Because apparently, when Ashoka decides to go viral, he does it in multiple languages. Somewhere, a scribe is probably having a meltdown trying to conjugate compassion. Mainstream historical fact. Ashoka's inscriptions have been found as far west as modern-day Afghanistan, written in Greek and Aramaic for the benefit of foreign subjects and allies. It's one of the earliest documented efforts at multilingual governance. And you thought subtitled content was a modern concept. He doesn't just want to rule his empire. He wants to influence it, shape it, heal it, not by fear, but by feelings. You wonder how that's going over with the military. You get your answer sooner than expected. One morning, a general storms into court, barefoot, muddy, furious. Apparently, a regional governor refused to build a new fort on the frontier, quoting Ashoka's no unnecessary aggression policy. The emperor listens calmly. Then he asks, "Was the threat real?" "No," the general mutters. Ashoka raises an eyebrow. "Then your anger is misplaced. You could cut the tension with a mango But instead, Ashoka invites the general to dinner, and that night, over curried lentils and awkward silence, he recites a sutra about stilling the angry mind. By dessert, the general's at least pretending to be enlightened. Progress? Quirky historical tidbit. One of Ashoka's edicts specifically warns against celebrating festivals with excessive drumming. Somewhere, a teenage musician is still pouting about that. Still, not everyone is on board the Dharma train. Some Brahmins complain that Buddhism's getting too much attention. Some nobles grumble that peace doesn't pay as well as war. And some villagers just want their taxes lowered and their roads paved. Historians still argue whether Ashoka's reforms alienated parts of his court and clergy, or whether he successfully balanced competing interests through sheer charisma and relentless public service. The records, much like royal dinners, are rich but hard to digest. Ashoka, for his part, keeps doubling down. He funds a major council of Buddhist monks and scholars. Think of it like an intergalactic peace summit, but with saffron robes and a lot more incense. They debate doctrine, ethics, meditation techniques. There's even a passionate argument over whether or not yawning during prayer is technically disrespectful. Verdict, yes, but forgivable. The council goes on for weeks. Ashoka attends most sessions, listening with a look you recognize now. Not boredom, not awe, just hunger. A hunger for clarity, for meaning, because even emperors need something to believe in besides themselves. Afterward, he sponsors missions to send Buddhist emissaries to places you've only seen on ancient maps. Sri Lanka, Egypt, Macedonia, even lands beyond the Himalayas. These aren't military campaigns, they're invitations. Spiritual LinkedIn requests sent via sandal courier. And they work. You start getting letters, crinkled scrolls with foreign seals, describing new monasteries, new believers, new cultures engaging with the Dharma. Ashoka beams like a proud dad at a science fair. Except instead of a baking soda volcano, someone's built a stupa out of coral. In a quieter moment, he tells you, every life touched by peace, that's a victory too. You're not sure whether to roll your eyes or hug him. You settle for nodding. Again, it's a full-time job at this point. Then one evening, as fireflies rise in the lotus ponds like glowing punctuation marks, Ashoka takes you to the archives. The real archives. Not the ones nobles brag about during tours, but the dusty chamber deep beneath the palace. It smells like parchment, cedar oil, and secrets. He opens a chest, old, heavy, carved with lions, and takes out a bundle of letters. Not royal decrees, personal ones. From prisoners, monks, farmers, even children. Each one a response to his edicts. One letter stands out. It's from a girl in a remote village who wrote, I didn't know kings could be kind. Ashoka folds it carefully. That's the best title I've ever earned. You stay quiet. It seems the right thing to do. And then there's a strange event no one really talks about. The day Ashoka shaved his head again. He does it in private. No ceremony. No chanting. Just him, a polished bowl of water, and a razor. You don't ask why. You don't need to. He's not becoming a monk, not officially. But you get the sense he wants to let go of something. Or maybe everything. That night he eats in silence. No court music, no advisors, no speeches. Just a bowl of barley porridge and the sound of frogs singing outside a window. It's weirdly peaceful. You feel like you're intruding on a man who's halfway out the door of his own legend. You wonder, is this what power looks like when it stops pretending to be invincible? Or maybe, just maybe, it's what healing looks like, draped in royal silk, whispering to the stars. The rain won't stop. It's been falling for days now. Slow, steady, a liquid lullaby tapping against tiled roofs and soaking the sandalwood groves. You sit under a half-collapsed awning, watching servants try to sweep water back into the sky, which is, of course, futile. But that's bureaucracy for you. Ashoka doesn't mind the rain. He walks through it without an umbrella, robes plastered to his skin, smiling like someone who just figured out the punchline of life and forgot to tell anyone. His guards, less philosophical, grumble behind him with soggy armor and a collective sigh that could level crops. He's headed to a local monastery, one recently rebuilt after a fire that may or may not have been caused by a lantern, a monkey, and a lesson in impermanence. Inside, the monks are chanting. You can feel the sound more than hear it. Like your bones are humming along. Ashoka joins without fanfare, kneeling on a reed mat that looks about one prayer away from unraveling. And just like that, the emperor becomes a student again. Mainstream historical fact. Later in life, Ashoka visited countless monasteries across the empire, not as a ruler inspecting subjects, but as a devotee seeking wisdom. He said to have personally supported over 80,000 Buddhist monks and nuns, providing food, shelter, and funding for new temples. Back at the palace, things are quieter now. He's delegated more authority to his governors, a move that makes some ministers suspicious and others relieved. You're not sure if it's a retirement plan or a power move disguised as detachment. But when you ask, he just shrugs and says, a good tree does not need to hold every leaf. The problem is, not all the leaves agree. Some provinces, particularly the outer ones, start testing limits, tax delays, border skirmishes, minor revolts dressed up as aggressive farming disagreements. You'd laugh if the reports weren't written in such serious calligraphy. Ashoka responds not with swords, but with letters, long, poetic ones, quoting Dharma, gently scolding, vaguely threatening in that way only Buddhist monarchs can pull off. May the rains of compassion soften your soil, he writes to one rebel chief, which sounds lovely until you realize he's also rerouting grain shipments away from the area. Quirky tidbit time. One edict from this era includes a detailed list of animals Ashoka has decreed must not be killed, including parrots, squirrels, and, oddly, certain bats. Historians are still trying to figure out what those bats did to earn a partial pardon. His daily routine changes, too. Less court, more meditation. Less pomp, more walking barefoot through fields. Occasionally, he shows up unannounced at village councils and just sits, listening, chewing on a figure, occasionally offering unsolicited but surprisingly solid life advice. You can always tell we've been somewhere by the trail of startled farmers and the faint scent of sandalwood. Historians still argue whether this period marked Ashoka's withdrawal from worldly rule or a clever transformation of it. Trading force for moral presence, authority for influence. It's hard to tell where the man ends and the message begins. One afternoon, he calls you into the garden. He's pruning a bonsai tree, meticulously, reverently, the way most people approach ancient manuscripts or nervous goats. You know, he says without looking up, trees are better rulers than men. How so? They ask for nothing, give everything, and they know when to let go. You nod, as always. It's becoming your primary skill set. Somewhere, a tiny leaf flutters to the ground like punctuation. But not everything is Zen and poetry. There's a persistent rumor circling like a vulture at a royal feast that Ashoka plans to divide the empire among his grandchildren. It sounds like a bedtime story designed to keep aristocrats up at night. Turns out, it's true. He's not naming a single heir. Instead, he's drafting guidelines for cooperative rule, shared leadership among kin, advised by elders, guided by Dharma. It's either visionary governance or a recipe for a very dramatic family reunion. When his ministers hear the plan, their faces twist into identical expressions of polite horror. You can actually hear someone clutch their pearls. Still, Ashoka remains calm. Dynasties rot from within, he says. Maybe it's time we plant something else. He pauses and adds, besides, it's not like I can take any of this with me. The room goes quiet, not out of respect, out of awkwardness. No one wants to imagine Ashoka dying. He's supposed to outlive everyone. Like rain, or taxes, or that one patch of mold in the royal bathhouse that refuses to leave. Later, in his private study, he writes what may be his last great inscription. It's not carved in stone or bronze, just ink on fragile palm leaf. To govern without cruelty is not weakness, but the highest strength. May those who follow care more for the people than the throne. You find it tucked in a drawer years later, brittle with age, but unmistakably his. That night, lightning flickers behind the mountains like celestial candlelight. Ashoka watches in silence, hands folded, eyes reflecting storms you can't quite see. You wonder, was this what he meant to become all along? A king who walked away from the battlefield, only to conquer something far bigger. Himself? He smiles, as if hearing your question. Doesn't answer. Just keeps watching the rain. The morning mist rolls over the palace, like a sleepy dragon curling up for a nap. Dew clings to every surface. Stones, leaves, servant sandals, turning everything into a reluctant slip hazard. You pad down the colonnade, yawning, and find Ashoka already awake, sipping herbal tea as though he never stopped to sleep at all. His eyes scan the horizon, though it's hidden behind fog thick enough to lose a chariot in. Do you know what's beyond that? He asks without turning. You're tempted to say more fog, but instead you just shrug. That's your dynamic now. He drops riddles, and you provide interpretive silence. He smiles. Opportunity. Or perhaps just another kind of trouble. By now, the empire is vast. From the Himalayas to the southern tip of the subcontinent, the Mauryan reach stretches further than any Indian dynasty before it. But big empires mean big problems. Communications slow. Roads get washed out. Tax collectors grow too creative. Somewhere out west, someone has declared themselves a minor god again, which is not even the third strangest item on the agenda today. Mainstream historical fact. Ashoka's empire was one of the largest in world history at the time, encompassing almost the entirety of the Indian subcontinent, except for a few stubborn regions down south that managed to remain independent. He ruled over more people than ancient Rome ever would at its peak. He tries to maintain unity not through force, but through a web of messages, his famous edicts, some carved into rocks, others etched into towering pillars, all meant to whisper the same thing across centuries. Live with kindness, govern with compassion, and for heaven's sake, stop sacrificing goats on Tuesdays. The pillars are marvels, chiseled with shocking precision, topped with snarling lions, elegant lotuses, and in one case, a wheel that looks suspiciously like a minimalist fidget spinner. You trace your fingers along one and wonder how many hands have done the same across time. Quirky tidbit. One of Ashoka's edicts was written in Greek and Aramaic. He had them placed on the western frontier of his empire, possibly to reach Hellenistic audiences. Because nothing says Pan-Asian spiritual PR campaign like multilingual rock posts. He sends emissaries even further, beyond the borders, to modern-day Sri Lanka, Thailand. Even as far as the Mediterranean, these envoys aren't soldiers or merchants. They're monks, carrying scrolls instead of swords. Their mission? Spread the message of Dharma, not imperialism. You overhear one ambassador telling confused camel herder about karma, using pebbles, an onion, and what may have been interpretive dance. Not the most orthodox theology, but the camel seems intrigued. Historians still argue whether Ashoka's overseas missions were primarily spiritual or subtly political. Was it pure altruism, or was he softly exporting Mauryan influence the way modern empires export fast food? There's no definitive answer, just a trail of monasteries and questions. Back home, the emperor's health is starting to show cracks. Nothing dramatic, just more naps, slower walks, a fondness for dates soaked in honey, and a suspicious number of moments spent staring at birds. You once catch him whispering to a crow, which is either profound or a warning sign. He swears the bird offered good advice, which you chalk up to either divine communication or extreme sleep deprivation. Then comes the royal festival, an annual affair of color, music, and enough lentil stew to feed a continent. This year, Ashoka decides to attend incognito, wearing the world's worst disguise, a slightly different robe and no crown. No one is fooled, but everyone pretends to be, which is close enough to diplomacy. He mingles with the crowds, laughing with farmers, sampling street food, getting conned into buying a carved yak figurine that he definitely overpays for. At one point, a child tugs at his sleeve and asks, "Are you the king?" Ashoka kneels down, meets her eyes, and replies, "Only when I remember to be." You're not sure what that means, but it makes the girl smile, so you let it slide. Back in the palace, the scholars are arguing again, this time about celestial calendars. One insists a rare conjunction of planets marks the arrival of a new age. Another says it just means you shouldn't plant lentils on a Thursday. Ashoka listens patiently, then announces, "Perhaps the stars are only mirrors, reflecting the confusion below." The room goes quiet. Someone claps. You're 90% sure that was sarcastic. Even so, there's a shift. Ashoka begins planning less for the empire and more for its soul. He commissions more schools, more hospitals, rest stops for travelers, wells in drought-prone areas, and an entire department dedicated to the welfare of animals. Yes, animals. There are now officials whose full-time job is to ensure birds get enough millet and that turtles aren't bullied by the local children. You meet one such official, a man named Deepaka, who takes his turtle monitoring duties very seriously. He's currently in a feud with a goose. Quirky but real, Ashoka's commitment to animal welfare was centuries ahead of its time. His edicts list banned animal sacrifices, protected species, and even recommended veterinary care. A full government department was created for this purpose. Peter would have wept with joy. Still, not everyone's a fan. Some generals grumble that the empire's grown soft, that all this compassion stuff is lovely until someone tries to invade. One even mutters that you can't stop arrows with kindness. Ashoka just chuckles. You'd be surprised. The fog lifts briefly. You catch a glimpse of the distant hills, green and gold in the morning light. For a man who once drowned fields in blood, Ashoka now seems content to let wildflowers grow unchecked. He's rewritten the rules, not just of governance, but of what power means. And you're right here beside him, watching the slow shift from emperor to elder, from warrior to whisper. It's subtle, but undeniable, like the first chill before autumn, or the faint scent of incense after prayers. You can feel it, too. The sun climbs higher, warming the stone floors and chasing away the last of the morning chill. You find yourself wandering the palace gardens, where the air hums with the faint buzz of bees and the distant chatter of courtiers debating the price of silk. Ashoka's quiet revolution seems to extend even here, in the carefully pruned jasmine bushes and the lotus ponds, where dragonflies dart like shimmering jewels. You spot the emperor himself near the water's edge, crouched over a delicate sapling. His hands are rough, cracked from years of rule, but gentle as they tend to the tiny leaves. There's something almost childlike in the way he cares for this fragile life, a stark contrast to the ruthless conquest that marked his earlier years. Historians often highlight Ashoka's transformation from a fierce warlord to a proponent of peace and dharma, but the nuances of this change remain debated. Did his embrace of Buddhism spring purely from guilt and remorse after the bloody Kalinga War, or was it a calculated political shift to unify a sprawling empire under a moral code? Scholars still argue about his true motivations, but the evidence points to a leader deeply invested in personal and societal reform. You remember reading that the Kalinga War wasn't just a battle, but a cataclysmic event that killed over 100,000 people, turning the landscape into a field of sorrow. It was said that the emperor's heart broke amidst the carnage, pushing him to embrace nonviolence. You wonder if that same heartbreak lingers in the quiet moments, like this one by the garden pond. In the palace library, the scent of ancient scrolls mingles with fresh ink. You watch scribes copying Ashoka's edicts onto palm leaves, meticulous work preserving the wisdom meant to outlast stone and time. Some say these writings were among the earliest known examples of rulers' public communication, predating Roman imperial propaganda by centuries. The idea that a king would publicly share laws and moral guidance was revolutionary. Here's a quirky tidbit. One of the lesser-known edicts instruct officials to look out for travelers and provide food and shelter, effectively an ancient version of roadside assistance. Imagine getting a royal decree guaranteeing free snacks and lodging during your road trip. Road trip planners today could learn a thing or two. As you stroll past the gardens, you catch a glimpse of Ashoka's favorite peacocks, their iridescent feathers catching the light like living rainbows. It's easy to imagine these birds as symbols of the emperor's ideals: beauty, patience, and vigilance. According to legend, he once spared a peacock that was about to be sacrificed, a gesture reflecting his newfound respect for life. Yet, not everything in the empire blooms as peacefully. Political tensions simmer beneath the surface. Some provincial governors bristle at Ashoka's edicts, seeing them as interference in local customs and autonomy. There are whispers of rebellion, though none dare openly defy the emperor's moral authority. You overhear courtiers discussing the delicate balance between central power and regional independence, a challenge as old as empires themselves. One fascinating debate among scholars centers on the extent of Ashoka's direct control. Was his authority absolute, or did he rely heavily on local rulers to enforce his policies? Historians still dispute whether his vision of a moral empire was uniformly implemented or varied widely across regions. In the bustling markets of Pataliputra, vendors hawk spices, textiles, and exotic fruits brought from distant provinces. The city thrums with life, a vibrant mosaic of cultures, languages, and traditions. Ashoka's empire is not just a political entity, but a living, breathing world of commerce and culture, stitched together by roads, rivers, and the promise of shared values. Amid the clamor, you notice monks chanting softly near a newly erected stupa, a monumental structure housing relics of the Buddha. These stupas serve as both religious centers and symbols of Ashoka's commitment to Buddhism. The architectural style itself reflects a blend of local traditions and influences from far-off lands, showcasing the empire's openness to diversity. Quirky but true, some stupas were designed to encourage circumambulation, walking in circles, as a form of meditation and devotion. If you ever need a low-impact workout with spiritual benefits, this is it. The emperor's attention to welfare extends beyond humans. You find him later inspecting a newly built hospital for animals, a concept far ahead of its time. Ashoka's edicts mandate care for sick creatures and prohibit animal cruelty, policies that anticipate modern animal rights by centuries. Still, the empire faces practical challenges. Famine, drought, and disease periodically strike, testing the limits of Ashoka's administration. Efforts to build irrigation systems and granaries are underway, but resources are stretched thin. You can't help but admire the ambition of an empire trying to govern not just territory, but the very health and happiness of its people. As twilight falls, you sit beside Ashoka, watching fireflies blink like distant stars. The day's tensions ease, replaced by a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, this long nap of history is steering towards something better. Evening wraps around the palace like a soft, worn blanket, the scent of sandalwood incense drifting lazily through open windows. You're led to a quiet courtyard where the emperor holds court, but today the business is less about decrees and more about reflection. Ashoka's face is calm, the years of conquest replaced by a contemplative serenity that feels almost out of place in the chaos of empire. You settle into the background, listening as the emperor speaks of Dharma, not just as a religious ideal, but as a practical guide to governance and everyday life. This concept, borrowed from ancient Indian philosophy, is often simplified to duty or righteousness, but it runs deeper. It's about harmony, balance, and moral order. Ashoka wants his subjects to live in accordance with Dharma, believing this will lead to peace and prosperity. Here's a historical fact. Ashoka's inscriptions are among the earliest examples of a ruler publicly discussing ethics and morality as state policy. This was revolutionary, especially in a time when power often meant brute force and divine right. His edicts are carved on rocks and pillars, scattered across the subcontinent, a silent network of reminders to live well. But historians still argue whether Ashoka's emphasis on Dharma was genuine personal conviction or savvy political maneuvering. Some see it as a way to stabilize a vast, diverse empire by promoting a universal ethical code. Others believe it reflected a sincere spiritual awakening following the horrors of the Kalinga War. Maybe it's both, a complex blend of idealism and pragmatism. On a quirkier note, one of Ashoka's edicts bans the practice of animal sacrifices, a bold move in a culture where such rituals were common. Imagine the uproar among traditionalists. No more goats to the gods! The emperor's concern for all living beings, not just humans, signals a profound shift in how power and piety intertwine. You overhear courtiers gossiping about Ashoka's unusual habit of personally meeting commoners and listening to their grievances. In an era when kings were often distant figures, this accessibility is startling. It said he even disguised himself to roam the streets incognito, a sort of ancient reality check to ensure his rule was fair and just. Yet, there's a tension here. Can a ruler truly be just if his policies are enforced through imperial power? Some scholars debate whether Ashoka's vision of benevolence was limited by the practical demands of empire, tax collection, military defense, and maintaining order. Benevolence, after all, has its limits when borders are constantly tested. Walking through the dimly lit corridors, you spot colorful murals depicting scenes from Ashoka's life and Buddhist teachings. These artworks serve not only decorative purposes, but also educational ones, teaching literacy and moral lessons in a time before mass media. They're a bit like ancient graphic novels, complete with heroes, villains, and dramatic plot twists, except with fewer capes and more meditation. You pause by one mural showing a wheel with 24 spokes, the Dharma Chakra, or Wheel of Law. This symbol becomes central to Ashoka's reign, and later finds its way onto India's national flag. It represents a cycle of life, law, and righteousness, a visual shorthand for the empire's ideals. Quirky fact: the Dharma Chakra is thought to have been inspired by the wheel of a chariot, symbolizing progress and movement, not just physical but spiritual. If only our morning commutes felt that meaningful. Night deepens, and you notice a soft glow coming from a nearby temple. Inside, monks chant in rhythmic unison, their voices weaving a calming tapestry. Ashoka's promotion of Buddhism isn't just political, it's personal. He funds monasteries, sponsors pilgrimages, and even sends missionaries abroad, spreading Buddhist teachings as far as Sri Lanka and Central Asia. Still, not all subjects embrace this shift. Non-Buddhist communities sometimes view Ashoka's patronage as favoritism, leading to subtle religious tensions. Scholars debate whether Ashoka's support for Buddhism displaced older traditions or coexisted peacefully with them. As you prepare to leave the courtyard, you catch a glimpse of Ashoka gazing up at the stars, perhaps pondering the vastness of his empire and his place within it. The night air is cool and fragrant, carrying whispers of hope and change that stretch far beyond the palace walls.